I want to talk about is how to think about challenging times. And I want to start in a very basic way. My daughter, Jackie Cushman, who now writes a weekly column, she joined me earlier this year in writing a book called 5 Principles for a Successful Life. And we wrote the book because years ago, when I was a member of Congress and I'd go around and see 7th and 8th graders or 9th graders, I realized one day that they might learn a little bit from me about the legislative process, but they really wanted to know how to be successful and what they should do in life, and what were the lessons I had learned that they could learn from me instead of having to learn them the hard way. And so I began developing a way of thinking about living your life, and I came up with 5 principles which I want to share with you, because I think as you think of the future of Wheeling and you think of the future of the Panhandle and the future of the Ohio Valley, these principles actually at one level really apply to everybody in almost every circumstance. They're very straightforward. Let me just give you the 5. First is to dream big. Second is to work hard. Third is to learn every day. Fourth is to enjoy life. And fifth is to be true to yourself. And let me just tell you how I developed that. I started with dream big because if you don't have the courage to dream big, and I particularly say this to young people, you know, if you can't dream big when you're 13 or 17 or 21, you're sure not going to learn how to do it when you're 50. And this is a country in which we were founded with our Declaration of Independence, which said we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, Jefferson took that phrase, the pursuit of happiness, from a Scottish Enlightenment writer, and it actually means wisdom and virtue. It doesn't mean hedonism, it doesn't mean getting drunk, it doesn't mean a lot of things people sometimes confuse for happiness. It meant long-term, positive life based on wisdom and virtue. So every one of us here is uniquely endowed by God. We're the only country in the world that says that your personal rights come from God to each one of you. You are personally sovereign. And then you loan power to the government. But the center of sovereignty is always you personally. And the result is that our Constitution begins, we, the people of the United States. It doesn't say we, the lawyers, we, the judges, we, the politicians, we, the Congress, we, the bureaucrats. It says we, the people. But notice, we, the people, are not guaranteed happiness. We are entitled to the right to pursue happiness. So there's no legal standing to sue because you haven't been happy enough. There's no federal department of happiness. We don't produce happiness stamps. There's no ability to redistribute happiness. And this relates directly, I think, to the conversation we have to have as an American people, which is, how does the world really work? And what is it we can accomplish? And so my first suggestion to you would be, precisely because we're in the middle of economic hard times, precisely because it's clear the valley is going to be changing, dream big. Think in a positive way about the next 20 or 30 years in this region, and I'm going to give you a couple examples as I talk, and be prepared then to do the second thing, which is to work hard. My limited experience is that every successful person I've ever studied works really hard. If you watch Tiger Woods, he goes out and practices all the time. He leads an amazingly disciplined life. I know Brett Favre a little bit, and I'm a big Green Bay Packers fan, so I'm deeply conflicted now. But I know that Brett focuses and practices in a disciplined way all the time in order to be in good enough shape to continue to have the longest record for continuous starts in the history of the NFL. Everybody I've ever met who's really first rate works really hard. It's not just a question of being bright. You have to put in many hours to be successful. And this always sort of stops kids because they like to have big dreams if they can get them by Tuesday. And they say, no, that just doesn't quite work that way. But the third point I want to make to you is, it's not enough just to work. You also have to learn every day. The world is constantly changing. The world is bigger than we are. I find myself learning new things all day, every day. Coming into town today, I was getting briefed by your vice mayor, who was pointing out to me that Fort Henry here was the last place to have a skirmish in the American Revolutionary War because word had not gotten this far west that they'd signed the peace treaty. I've taught history for years. I didn't know that. I have a hunch it'll show up in one of my future novels. The fact that you were temporarily the capital of the state of Virginia during the maneuvering over secession. I didn't know that. And so you begin to go down these lists, and every time I turn around, I learn new things. And so I would say to you, as you try to think through the future of the region, one of the books I'd recommend to you strongly is a book called Regional Advantage by Saxenian, who's a sociologist at Berkeley, much more liberal than I am, but a very smart book. Because in Regional Advantage, she looks at what worked in Silicon Valley and why didn't it happen in Boston. And it's a fascinating study about the power of community and the fact that everybody in Silicon Valley pulled together. That there was one particular business professor at Stanford who had two students who happened to be named Hewitt and Packard. And he actually loaned them the $500 to found Hewlett-Packard. And they stayed in close touch as good alumni. And they began over the years to then help other people form businesses. And it was the cumulative energy. So if you start with the two universities you have here, and you start thinking about what I think is your greatest advantage is you have two universities on a river in an area that has, for example, right now, beautiful foliage. I mean, you could put together a picture book about this area that is just magnificent. And you're very close to the Pittsburgh airport. So you're close to an international airport. You are closer in travel time than North Pittsburgh. And that means sooner or later, when you figure out the right marketing, the panhandle is going to be where smart people live who don't want to waste their life fighting their way through Pittsburgh. And you're going to all of a sudden have... Then all of a sudden, if you build an intersection and talk together about the intellectual capabilities you have in these two universities, the capability of all the medical staffs you have in these two hospitals, the potential you have being this close to the Pittsburgh airport, you suddenly have a whole new story about quality of life, economic opportunity, raising your kids in a safe area with good people and strong values. And you might be shocked 10 years from now how many folks have decided to come here rather than other more expensive, more heavily populated, and ultimately not as much fun places. So